Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.
We are here at the Jewish Museum in New York. They say it's the eldest museum in the world, first Jewish museum in the world.
It's actually the oldest Jewish museum in the United States. The Jewish Museum in Vienna is 5 years older, but it did close in the 30s and it didn't open for several decades thereafter. So we are the oldest continuously operating Jewish museum in the world.
And you are in this beautiful mansion, the Warburg Mansion, who was given to the museum in 1947. The wife, Felix Warburg, gave the museum, sold the museum where we are now. And then obviously there have been changes, improvements, and so on and so forth.
It's actually a fantastic story. And it's a little bit, you're going to ask me, what am I doing at the Jewish Museum? It's not what my museum heritage is about, and we'll discuss it. But when I was asked to come, a big thing for me is the power of place that a museum represents. And I had this at MoMA, and I had it at the Israel Museum. And when they asked me, and I went walking on Fifth Avenue, and I saw this great white whale of neo-Gothic limestone mansion house that the Warburg family, one of the great families, the German Jewish families that really empowered the banking empire of America, had gifted to the museum in the 1940s. And I thought, it looks totally different from MoMA and from the Israel Museum, but this place is about power of place. It's about what the site and the setting and the architecture mean as the backdrop for what the content is about.
So this is one of the reasons that made you decide that you like this place.
It's one of them, yes.
Yeah. Now, you are an art historian. You have a long career. You worked at MoMA for many years, and then you were running the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Is it very different, the museum in Jerusalem and a Jewish museum in New York? I mean, another place where there is a very large Jewish community, maybe one of the largest in the world. What kind of difference there is in your job between, two different institutions?
It's interesting, the differences between when I finished at the Israel Museum at the end of 2018 and when I started here 1 year ago in 2023. The difference is how the world has changed, not the differences between the museums. As you know, I'm a modern art historian. So my whole focus before going to Israel was on 1850 to the present. What happened in the middle of the 19th century that enabled the invention of modernism? And, for me, it was a privilege to be at MoMA. And when I was asked to go to Jerusalem, in one respect, it seemed like another planet, that we would be landing on another planet from another planet. But then I realized that the story there is this narrative of universalism. So it's like the narrative of material cultural history from the beginning of time to the present and around the world. And it's not that it's in the Middle East. It's not that it's in Israel. It is that it is in the Holy Land. And it is a place where the legacy of material culture there takes you back 1.5 million years ago. But the miracle of the Israel Museum is that its collections cover all periods and cultures around the globe. So it was as if I could lift the rug under 1850 and understand the foundational history of world material culture. When these guys asked me to come to the Jewish Museum, I had already started thinking that the way that the world has changed in these last 5 years, it might be an important moment for museums devoted to specific cultures to show how they relate to this universal narrative. And I'd started thinking about this. And, Jewish culture has been wandering in the global diaspora for 3,500 years. And I started thinking, what if a place like the Jewish Museum in New York, with its stature as a Jewish museum in the world, took the approach of looking at 3,500 years of Jewish world culture as it has moved through the global diaspora, relating to, influencing, being influenced by all the cultures around it, no matter where and when, so that the story becomes not about looking at an individual culture individually in isolation, but rather looking at it in resonant connection with all other cultures. And so for me, it was a funny kind of engagement between the Israel Museum and here.
Yeah, but you went through the COVID, which was a very strange and difficult moment for museums, and not only for museums, but for the whole world. But most museums were closed for a long time. And in the same time, recently, sadly, there is a new very strong way of anti-Semitism in the world, and even in the United States. These pro-Pal manifestations in the universities and all over America, which was considered a very safe haven for the Jews, suddenly it's not exactly the same anymore. So what is the consequence of all this on a Jewish museum? Do you feel safe here? Do you feel that you have more responsibility than you had before? How is it?
It's interesting. We've been around long enough to remember 9/11.
Right.
And, there was before 9/11 and there was after 9/11. And now we're in this time where there has been October 7, 2023. Year ago. And there's before October 7 and after October 7. To answer your question, we need to start before October 7 and then shift to after October 7. When I embraced coming to the Jewish Museum, it was August 2023. My start date was November 1, 2023. So I accepted a few months before October 7. And then the story on the museum landscape, and this answers your earlier question too, I hope. The story on the museum landscape is that with COVID and all of the social challenges of these past 5 years, during which my professional focus was in the foundation world, so it was a bit different. But in the museum world, the coming together of COVID and all the social challenges of the last 5 years has really made it difficult for museums to understand and implement strategies for moving forward. There needed to be changes. And when I accepted to come
for every museum,
for all museums everywhere. So in my international museum community, which has stayed with me since I left the Israel Museum, and certainly the New York and American museum community, when I accepted to come to the Jewish Museum, already the conversations were, how do we function in this new environment? How do we make museums relevant post-COVID in the new virtual age and with all of the social challenges of these times? How do we address all of them? And, part of it's practical. Attendance plunged everywhere. So how do you get back attendance? And programming became virtual. So how do you get those people inside, as well as taking advantage of having them accessible to you in your programming all over the world? How do you deal with all that? And that was already a struggle. And also staffs, working remotely and finding that to be appropriate and satisfactory. But in the museum world, your objects are on site, your collections are on site, your audiences are on site. So that was an interesting challenge. And I actually was asked in a couple of instances to write about that. Post October 7 really, I don't want to say it changed those challenges, but it added to the layering of challenges to be addressed, not just by the Jewish Museum, but by museums everywhere.
Why? Can you explain it a little? The community, the Jewish community in New York, Jews all over the world that come here to visit this museum, right? Where there are 30,000 pieces, if I am not wrong, who are religious pieces, who are Jewish items and so on and so forth, but also pictures, paintings, and then there is a long history of exhibitions here in the Jewish museum. Not very long time ago, there was a very large exhibition on the Sassoon family. You had Soutine, you had many great Modigliani and so on and so forth, exhibitions here. So how is it today? I mean, people are confident to come here? Are they frightened to come here? You have like more secure. How does it work?
I'm happy to answer that question, but I want to step back one and be a little anecdotal to set the stage. Again, my experience and expertise weren't in the Jewish museum world. This is a little anecdotal. Probably a year and a half ago, I was actually asked by the Maimonides Fund's Sapir Journal, which was organizing a culture issue, to write about the role and responsibility of museums, again, pre-October 7, but post-COVID, and given the overwhelming embrace of the virtual world and of the opportunity for live streaming programming and things like that. And also as a kind of PS to talk about where Jewish museums fit into the picture today. And it was just when this Jewish museum did a brilliant show called New York 1962-64. And it was about that incredible period when this museum was 60 years old. And when it became the platform for the shift of the focus on emerging contemporary art from Europe to America, and particularly New York, after World War II. So we were the first museum to show Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg.
Here you have Andy Warhol.
I have all of them. Actually, you're in my office. This is the poster. This is a vintage edition that we got on eBay of the poster for Robert Rauschenberg's first show at the Jewish Museum. Philip Guston, we were the platform for his engagement first as an abstractionist and then as a figurationist. We were the first to show Ed Reinhardt, Barney Newman, Mark Rothko, Helen Frankenthaler. All of these artists were engaged with this museum. The exhibition was fantastic, and it really resurrected the importance of this museum in the global art historical and artistic narrative at that moment in time after World War II. The show was great. I saw the show. I felt that there was one dimension of the story that wanted to be addressed, not in the exhibition, but perhaps in an accompanying conference or seminar, which was why were so many of those artists Jewish. And, you just have to think about the period in time. This is after World War II. You had all of the European emigre artists, whether they were Holocaust survivors or the children of refugees, who were trying to deal with the PTSD of the war by creating new visual vocabularies. And, we know this across time. How did, Dada and Surrealism were a response to the PTSD of World War I. Abstraction and minimalism and color field were responses to the PTSD of World War II. And it would have been interesting to explore that dimension of that story. So fast forwarding to this past year, I arrived on November 1, and the board asked me immediately to write a message about my arrival and to relate to October 7. And, I felt it was very challenging to do that. And all the museums in the city were in a moment of PTSD, and we were about to get together to talk about it. And I thought, okay, we can do this. And our message was that we condemned savagery and brutality, that museums exist, and we condemned savagery and brutality and called for the restoration of humanism. That museums exist to be the custodians of the history of world culture, and without humanism, there is no such history. And we said that our hearts and minds were with innocent Israelis and Palestinians caught in the crosshairs of the conflict, and that we would put together a plan of action so that the museum could be identified as a platform for engagement and education in a time when it could not be needed more. And we did that. A few weeks later, we set out a plan that we are still continuing a year later.
So what are you doing since you took over after being very successful in Jerusalem, which must have been an extraordinary experience, for you, human? And what about this coming back to America? You're not from New York, but you are in America. What do you do? What are you planning to do? How is this going to go with you?
You just asked several questions. We'll start with post-October 7 in our action plan. A few weeks later, we sent a message to our whole community saying that we were going to do workshops for our staff so that our staff could understand notions of the history of racism and anti-Semitism, the history of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire and what emerged after the demise of the Ottoman Empire, how Israel and Palestine came into being, where they are, what they are. These are stories that no one knows, and we felt an obligation in the Jewish Museum for our staff. And so on a regular basis, we continued to gather our staff together. And also seeing the polarized conflict that continues to aggravate, even sessions on civil discourse, how you engage with one another when you have different perspectives. So that was internal. Externally, we started a series of directors' talks, which I do monthly, with cultural personalities, not talking about politics, but looking at the world through a cultural lens and at the trauma that we are absorbing and trying to address, but looking at that situation culturally, not politically. And also, and importantly, we're giving artists the opportunity to show work responding to trauma, whether it is today or from a time past. So during October, I was seeing on Instagram that Zoya Cherkassky, a Soviet emigre to Israel when she was 14, but who already had learned to paint while she was growing up in Kyiv and had learned her art history very brilliantly. I knew her work at the Israel Museum, and we all started to see on Instagram that she was producing these incredibly powerful drawings responding to October 7th. They were colored pencil and watercolor, and we called her gallerist and said, we need to show these as soon as possible. He said she's making a series. As soon as they're done, they'll come to you. And in December, we opened a very moving, modest installation of Zoya's drawings responding to October 7th. And we did a small commemorative volume. The media embraced the power and the meaning of those drawings, and the response was incredible. So we did that. And then Michal Rovner produced this beautiful new series of works based on poppies, also responding to October 7. We acquired one of the diptychs. Currently, we have an exhibition of the work of Ilit Azulai, an Israeli photographic artist whose work is about the meaning of objects, how objects carry the meaning of what they are and where they were found. And in a way, it gives you an opportunity to think about memory and avenues toward immortality using objects. And that exhibition is on currently. So we're really providing these opportunities. And there's one more point, which is that the directors of the largest museums in the city started to get together on a regular basis. And in our first conversation, which was very soon after my arrival on November 1, each of us was asked what we were doing so far. And I explained that we were already on the move. And colleagues, in a gratifying way, said that they really admired and respected what we had done. Most of them subsequently have had to deal with interventions, protests, even acts of vandalism. And knock on wood, we have not had that because we were very clear at the beginning that we wanted to be a platform for engagement and discourse. And, in a way, if you wanted to ask, what's our position? That's our position. And we're continuing it. And we're continuing it as we speak. And, as we look at our exhibition program going forward, we're really paying attention to how exhibitions, which still can and should be about important subjects in archaeology, Jewish world culture, art history, can and should happen, but how their sensitivity to the times that we're in can also be a part of the picture. So in 2 weeks, we're opening an exhibition of Trenton Doyle Hancock and Philip Guston together. You know the work of Philip Guston.
I do.
And I trust that it's a very touching story for me because at MoMA, I knew Philip Guston first. as a not very remarkable abstractionist. But what happened to him as the 60s moved on, and in the social turmoil of the 60s, again, he invented a new visual vocabulary to respond to the trauma of the times, and he became Philip Guston. And throughout the 60s, the Jewish Museum was his docking station because he felt Jewish culturally, but not religiously. And he was a creative figure. And so the museum gave him the kind of opportunity for a comfortable platform for creative making. And of course, as you know, his subjects were white supremacy, racism, anti-Semitism. Fast forward 60 more years. So, from the founding of the museum goes 60 and you get Guston, goes 60 and we are today. And Trenton Doyle Hancock is a 50-year-old Black artist from South Texas whose work, whose visual vocabulary draws explicitly and directly from Guston. And today, 60 years later, he's dealing with those issues of white supremacy, racism, and anti-Semitism, using that same vocabulary and, of course, formulating his own. So we're opening in 2 weeks, the day after the presidential election, an exhibition of Guston in dialogue with Hancock.
So that's very interesting, and we will look forward to see it. One question I wanted to ask, in Israel, where you lived for many years and had great responsibility of the Museum of Israel, are you still the chairman of the Jerusalem Foundation?
No. That was a full-time position. So I stepped down from that position after 5 years.
Honorary chairman? No.
I'm the director emeritus of the Israel Museum.
You're right.
In the Jerusalem Foundation, I served for almost 5 years as the executive chair.
Sure, yeah. But in Israel, I don't want to be polemic, it's a question you can answer, no. But you have the feeling that diaspora is not that important, right? I mean, I didn't have the feeling that the Israelis give to the diaspora history and what happened the same importance that it has. And therefore, this museum and some other Jewish museums around the world instead are diaspora museums in a certain way. I mean, not that there is a difference, but still, the Jews were in diaspora for many, many years. Can you answer to this question?
Sure.
Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know. I had the feeling in Tel Aviv when I visited the Museum of the Diaspora that it was not enough, that the 2000 history of the Jews in the diaspora was something everywhere, in Hungary, in France, in Italy, in Spain, in the United States, of course.
So it's funny. This can't be one interview. This has to be a series. You're asking so many questions that are relevant and poignant today. You said in passing that I'm not from New York, and I'm not.
You're not, I know.
I'm from rural southwestern Pennsylvania.
I know.
And I came to New York as a young guy from school because my field was modern art history, and I lucked out. I got to be at the best place. I got to be mentored by the best art historians in my field. I'm privileged to say that William Rubin, the great Picasso scholar and historian, was my mentor for 20 years.
You were lucky to have this.
It was unbelievable not to go there. My first day at MoMA, July 24, 1974, was Alfred Barr's last day at MoMA. And an old gentleman in the middle of summer wearing a Harris tweed jacket and a bow tie opened a door for me. And I went through, and then I thought, I've seen pictures of that guy. And it was Alfred Barr. But in any case, I came...
the historical director.
The founder of MoMA. In 1929.
That's right.
And yet I'm from somewhere else, and I landed from another planet here. And when we went to Israel, it was the same. We'd never been there. And why did we go there? We went there because I was asked a little bit out of the blue if I would consider being the director. I went to see the museum. You know it. Yeah. Power of place, site, setting, landscape, architecture.
Right.
And, 3 different incredible strains of international modernism intersecting on a hilltop in Jerusalem, and 550,000 objects that tell the narrative of material culture from the beginning of time to the present. And yet, and it's universal. And we were there from another planet, and it gives you fresh eyes to look at things. And two things. One, being there, it was a way to engage Israel and the global diaspora, Jewish and non-Jewish, because of the power and meaning of this message about all things connect across time and around the globe. And, we were able, with a lot of help and support from everywhere, to accomplish that. And I mean, this is my thing. It's like cultural diplomacy and cultural activism are a way to get past challenges and locked doors and to see brighter opportunities moving ahead. And, to fast forward, I feel that way at the moment. And coming here from there, two things. It happens. Were you at the Venice Biennale this year?
I went.
So that'll be another interview. But, foreigners everywhere. There couldn't be a more meaningful theme at this moment. We're all foreigners wherever we are. Even at home, we're foreigners. And for me, the notion, I am Jewish. I was brought up with a very deep Jewish inner core, but not trained religiously particularly, but it has always been with me. So this idea, I never thought about it, but in these recent years, we all have to think about it. You're from somewhere. There's a core identity, but you can benefit from cultural assimilation wherever you are so that you are also at home where you are. And, look, the Holy Land is the fountainhead for several monotheistic faiths. It's not just about Judaism, but they began there and they grew into diasporatic cultures. And so when I was asked to come here, as I said before, I started thinking about the Jewish world, which has been wandering in the global diaspora for 3,500 years. Not to say more than anybody else, but probably it is the longest surviving culturally specific experience of wandering in the global diaspora.
What you're saying is very interesting. For many, many centuries, Jews had the same prayers or the same laws, but nevertheless, they belonged to the country where they were. So they were French, they were Americans, English, Italians, and they also became soldiers and magistrates and professors. I mean, they had a significant role in the life of the countries where they were accepted. And they are proud, even today, to be whatever, Americans and Jews, French and Jews, Italians and Jews, right? And in Israel, it's a bit different because you're Jewish, but you're Israeli.
Correct. And, again, it's another interview because the point is for us whose experience has been in the global diaspora, don't say the Jewish diaspora, in the global diaspora, you have a core identity and it can be religious, it can be spiritual, but you also have an identity of engaging with the culture where you live your life. And it helps to start in the global diaspora because you don't know, but subliminally, subconsciously, this is how you function throughout your lifetime. Part of the reason why I said yes to come here is that I felt and I feel, and again, it's before October 7th, that perhaps a museum like this, which has over 40,000 objects, which are archeology, Judaica, Jewish ceremonial art, and the fine arts from around the globe. This is a collection that really can underscore this point about a core identity and a resonance with where you are, with the culture and the cultural experience of where you are in your lifetime. And, this is part of where you asked about where our exhibition program is going. And again, in my mind, it's very important to be attuned to the times that you're in so that you don't seem tone deaf. So on the one hand, you said, famous artists. So we're working on an exhibition for next year on Paul Klee and fascism. And it's exactly about the last 10 years of Klee's life. After he became the poster child for degenerate art, he left Austria, he went to Switzerland, and you saw in his work the profound demise of the creative spirit that had given him his prominence. But that work has huge importance. And in the climate that we live in today, it's meaningful to take that approach. That's one direction. Another direction is that there was an exhibition in Florence done by the Uffizi and the Medici Archive a year and a half ago on the Florentine ghetto during the reign of the Medici. And they came to us about taking the show. And I said, it was a beautiful show. You may have seen it.
No, I haven't.
It was a beautiful show. And I said, but the point is, for us, you have to extend the timeline and you have to contemporize. You have to look at the story that from 3,500 years ago, Jewish culture has wandered in the global diaspora, either wandering or living in a ghetto, such as was the case with the Florentine ghetto, where the Medicis supported and gave safety to the Jewish community, which then helped nourish the flourishing of the Medici reign. And I feel that a museum like this should take as an important part of its charge to look at how you can show that single cultures can carry their identity, but also resonate with the cultures around them wherever and whenever.
That's the case in Jerusalem, right? Where all these religions share peacefully, in a certain sense, their own tradition and all this machine, Friday for the Muslims, Saturday for the Jews, Sunday for the Christians, functions in a very easy way. If there were no war or saying this goes on easy. But also another thing that I see when you go to Morocco, for instance, you can see how well the Jewish souk and the Arab souk live one next to the other very peacefully. If you go in a city like Fez, you see how many Jewish symbols are everywhere. You don't have the feeling of what politics do. Right. So your idea that culture is the bridge, is a diplomatic universal language for peace, it's true. I mean, and, then there are accidents created by politics, but the art goes on.
In our 22 years in Jerusalem, we fully understood, and again, in part because we landed there from another planet, we were looking through different eyes. We landed there and we saw that the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the Muslim community got along just fine. They were in the same shuk. They were trading. They were doing business. And, did they love each other? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But they understood that they could live and work together. And it's actually an incredible example for the rest of the world.
It's like a family, I mean, in a family, they all belong to the city, but then sometimes you quarrel, sometimes you make peace, but all together, it works.
And it's political agendas that want to derail that balance, that equanimity. It's interesting. Again, during our workshops, it was very important to do one on the history of the Ottoman Empire and what happened after the Ottoman Empire. And, the Ottoman Empire, okay, it was good, it was bad, whatever it was, but you had cultures, not countries. You had cultures that moved throughout the empire, doing business with each other, living and working together.
But also the Ottoman Empire is the empire that gave home to the Jews when they were expelled from Spain and in
1492
by Isabel and from Portugal. No, I think the Sultan took many Jews. Some went to Saloniki, others other parts of it. I think so. No?
Yes, and look, today we have the challenge of rising nationalism in many places, and we're not going to discuss the politics of the moment here in the U.S., but in the Middle East, you didn't have Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey. These countries weren't named. You had cultures that moved throughout the region, and that was the narrative of the region for a very long time. We're bringing, just before I forget, we were asked, do you know what the Tel Dan Stela is? The Tel Dan Stela is a big piece of stone. It's like an Instagram from 900 BC. Mm-hmm. So it's a big piece of stone that was excavated 40 years ago in Tel Dan in the north of Israel and written in Aramaic. And it's a Mesopotamian king boasting that he had defeated the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And the kingdom of Judah is the house of David. And at the bottom of the inscription in Aramaic, it says the house of David. So it's the oldest recorded evidence, archaeological evidence of the reality of the existence of the house of David as distinct from the biblical narrative. And, the house of David was the fountainhead for the forming not just of Judaism, but of Christianity and Islam over the 1500 years from that moment. We're bringing it here for 5 weeks, beginning right after Thanksgiving through the New Year. And our message is going to be about these cultural, artifactual symbols that remind us of the connectedness of these faiths where the politics of the day try to create fractiousness.
But what about the Jewish, I don't know if we can call it community? I mean, what about the Jews in the United States, especially in New York now, where your museum is, where you live, your community? How do they feel vis-a-vis what's going on? I mean, you have a feeling of, you said there is a big change. You have a feeling of different kind of security or...
I think what this moment is doing, and I find it really, many books need to be written. Many are being written, but some need to be written that really focus on this. It's a moment to think about the origins of your core identity and the mechanisms for living comfortably wherever you are. You remember Ai Weiwei's documentary several years ago. You know how close he and I are.
I know.
And you remember our exhibition in Jerusalem. And we have continued. We speak regularly. And our most recent interview together was for the Salzburg Global Seminar in Salzburg in the summer. And we did a talk for several hundred guests. And it was exactly about the same subject of taking a cultural, not a political one.
He is very keen on the language of displaced people, right? This is his main, and he said there's so many people in the world.
Well, you remember 5 years ago, he did a huge documentary called Human Flow. That's how we were first connected. And it's exactly about the global crisis of 100 million people uprooted and moving around the world. And again, the biblical story was not different. There were fewer, but there were fewer humans. And this is where cultural activism can be hugely meaningful. In my view, what's happening at the moment is that people are sort of stopping and taking a breath and thinking through the source of their core identity and the way that they succeed in living and working where they are. So if you're in the Jewish community, for example, it used to be that you were either in the community or you became assimilated. Well, it's not a black and white notion. It is that you have a core identity and yet you live and work where you need to have comfort and engagement. The Jewish Museum in the 60s, we already spoke about this. How did Barney Newman, Ed Reinhardt, all those guys, Dustin, how did they find this place to be the docking station that enabled them to preserve that identity without religiosity and to become productive as creative makers? This is how the world should work. You ask about what we are able to do at a time like this. We do these monthly directors' talks.
It sounds very interesting and important. And the question I want to ask is, the younger generations, people who are in college or today, are they coming to the museum? Are you coming to your lectures? Are they curious about their identity?
The answer is yes. And I think what happens is that if you think through what I'm speaking about, that your core identity and your cultural identity where you are don't have to be a disconnect. They can be a resonant connection. They can be a resonant synthesis that enables you to function with an embrace of your identity and also an embrace of life where you live and how you live. And I see that we are feeling this. We are feeling this. I mean, in simple terms, again, I only started on November 1, and it was after October 7. Many organizations are coming to us and asking to use our ballroom space, which is our, programming space, which seats 250 guests, for their events. So many Israeli and American or Jewish identified organizations have been using the museum, and I am promoting this. And, in addition to my own talks, and two of them have been with artists last spring. Two of them were with artists. I did one with Zoe Cherkassky, one with Michal Rotner, and I did one with Tariq Massoud, the Egyptian-born Muslim head of the Middle East Initiative at the Kennedy School, where I am a senior fellow. And we did it. Our talk was called Isaac and Ishmael, brothers looking for a brighter path, being Tariq and me. We come from different cultures, but we are our brethren. And, coming back to Weiwei, if you remember our exhibition in Jerusalem in 2017, which was called Maybe, Maybe Not. I said to Weiwei, look, we're doing this in Jerusalem. This show can't be what you show everywhere. This has to be about the resonant connections between Jewish people and Chinese people. We had breakfast. Our first meeting was a breakfast that took 6 hours. And at the end of the meeting, he looked across the table and he said, now I understand. You are the Chinaman and I am the Jew. And, that's really what cultural engagement, cultural diplomacy, cultural activism want to achieve.
I wish you to be successful in your way of thinking, but I believe what you just said is that you fight. Fighting. You are defending or you are promoting or whatever the importance of cultural dialogue and of respect of different cultures that can live together peacefully and respecting each other. And this is a Jewish museum with 40,000 historical pieces where you can understand the history of the Jews somehow, with exhibitions and lectures about the new era, whatever, if we want to say the post-October 7 era, in the same time a center, right, where people of Jews, but also of other religion, can find a dialogue. That's more or less what I understood.
Yes, and I wouldn't use the word defending. I would use the word promoting.
Promote. I didn't want, promote.
And if I might, I'll tell you about one other new initiative that we're doing, which is before this past year, but all the more so after October 7, colleagues, directors of museums across the country, encyclopedic museums that collect all cultures, but have not yet collected Jewish ceremonial art, Judaica, Jewish world culture, started calling me saying, how can we build a collection of Judaica, of Jewish ceremonial art? And I would say it's too late. The great material is already dispersed. And if material comes onto the market, there are collectors who will, with enthusiasm, pay more than you. And I said, but we have 14,000 brilliant examples of Jewish world culture. So borrow from us. The Cleveland Museum was one of the more recent ones since I've arrived here. And the director, Bill Griswold, said, so let's do it. So in June, we opened an installation at the Cleveland Museum of 8 great examples of Jewish ceremonial art from different periods and cultures, placed in the galleries of those cultures and time frames where and when they were made. And they're stunning, of course, because, they're silver, they're gold, they're bronze. They're on pedestals. They're brilliantly lighted. So in, German Renaissance, Italian Baroque, British Imperial, American Colonial, Islamic, Asian, you see these great examples. You enter the museum. There's a huge sign that says Jewish ceremonial art from the Jewish Museum, New York. At the Cleveland Museum, you take a brochure. It's got a roadmap to get you around the museum. And it's a huge. And we're working now with a number of other museums who also want to do the same. And it's being explicit and, not philosophical or ideological. It's being materially cultural about saying, take 6 objects and put them there. And people get the point. It's really actually moving and exciting to see that this isn't theory, it's practice.
And you have very good, I imagine, relationship with the other Jewish museums around the world.
Yes.
You work, you exchange things.
Well, it's actually, of course, because of my own background in history, I have great relations with the modern museums and all the encyclopedic museums, U.S. internationally. But this museum has very good relations with other Jewish museums. And again, there, I feel that they're struggling to figure out how to do what they do today. And we can and are working on it together. And we are in a position to try to lead the way with them and for them.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.